The mechanic's wrench slipped from his oil-stained fingers, clattering against concrete as he stared at the skeletal form dragging itself across the Phoenix asphalt. What should have been a magnificent German shepherd was nothing more than matted fur stretched over jutting ribs, each labored breath a testament to unspeakable suffering. This wasn't just another stray dog. Those intelligent brown eyes held memories of betrayal that cut deeper than any physical wound. Eleanor Patterson's coffee cup shattered against her porch steps, the elderly woman's gasp echoing across the silent morning air. From her kitchen window, she watched the ghost of what had once been a proud K-9 officer collapse in the shade of her fence. 20 years of nursing had shown her countless horrors, but nothing compared to seeing nobility reduced to this, a warrior broken by the very hands that should have protected him. "Sweet Jesus," Michael Thompson whispered, his combat-trained instincts screaming that this was no accident. Who destroys a police dog? And why was this living skeleton searching for something in their quiet neighborhood? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Michael Thompson had seen enough broken things in his 45 years to recognize when something couldn't be fixed. The rusted Chevy in Bay 3, Eleanor Patterson's leaky faucet next door, his own sleep pattern since Afghanistan. Some damage ran too deep for repair. But the creature limping through his auto shop's back lot challenged everything he thought he knew about lost causes. The September heat in Phoenix was merciless, even at 7 in the morning. Michael had opened Thompson's auto repair before dawn, seeking the familiar comfort of grease-stained coveralls and the honest work of fixing engines. His converted garage apartment sat behind the shop, a cramped space that suited a man who'd learned to travel light. 3 years of living paycheck to paycheck had taught him that wanting less hurt less when life inevitably took it away. Across the narrow street, Eleanor Patterson emerged from her mint-green house carrying a mason jar of sweet tea, her silver hair already pinned in the neat bun she'd worn since her nursing days. At 68, she moved with the careful precision of someone whose body had served faithfully but now demanded respect for its limitations. The morning ritual never varied. Water her tomatoes, check the mailbox, wave to Michael if he was outside. Today, everything changed when she saw what had taken shelter beneath his dumpster. "Lord, have mercy," Eleanor whispered, her free hand finding the cross at her throat. "Michael, honey, you need to see this." The German shepherd, if the skeletal frame could still claim that noble designation, lifted his massive head at the sound of her voice. Intelligent brown eyes, clouded with pain but alert with desperate hope, fixed on Eleanor's face. His coat, once likely a proud black and tan, hung in matted clumps that couldn't hide the prominent ribs or the raw wounds circling his neck where a collar had been violently removed. Michael approached slowly, his mechanic's hands steady despite the tremor that had plagued him since Kandahar. This dog had been magnificent once, probably 80 pounds of muscle and training. Now he couldn't weigh more than 40, and every movement spoke of systematic starvation rather than simple neglect. "Easy, boy," Michael murmured, crouching to make himself less threatening. The dog's ears swiveled forward at his voice, a glimmer of recognition in those haunted eyes. Not recognition of Michael specifically, but of something familiar in his tone, his posture, his scent, military bearing, Michael realized. This dog knew soldiers. Eleanor knelt beside them, her arthritic knees protesting, and set down the mason jar. "He's been wandering the neighborhood for 3 days. I've been leaving scraps, but he won't let anyone close." She studied the animal's condition with a nurse's clinical eye. "These aren't street injuries, Michael. Someone did this deliberately." The dog's gaze shifted between them, as if weighing whether these humans could be trusted, or if they represented another betrayal in a world that had already taken everything. In that moment of silent communication, three broken souls recognized something in each other, the particular kind of damage that comes from serving others and being abandoned in return. The dog's first sip of water lasted 30 seconds. Michael had seen dehydration in Afghanistan, but watching this magnificent animal drink with desperate gratitude while Eleanor murmured soft encouragements felt like witnessing a resurrection. When the bowl emptied, the German Shepherd looked up with something Michael hadn't expected. Intelligence sharp enough to cut glass despite the suffering etched in every line of his emaciated frame. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Eleanor asked, settling her considerable frame onto Michael's shop floor with surprising grace. The dog's ears perked at her gentle tone, but he remained crouched in the corner, muscles coiled for flight despite his obvious weakness. Michael refilled the water bowl, noting how the dog's eyes tracked every movement. "He's been trained. Look how he watches our hands, our posture." "This isn't some backyard breeding disaster. This is professional work." The observation proved prophetic when Eleanor attempted to examine the wounds around the dog's neck. The moment her fingers approached the raw flesh where a collar had been savagely removed, the animal dropped into a perfect tactical position, belly low, weight distributed for maximum mobility, eyes locked on the nearest exit. It was a movement Michael recognized from his own canine handler training, executed despite malnutrition that should have made such precision impossible. "Jesus Christ," Michael breathed. "You're police, aren't you, boy?" The word police triggered an immediate response. The dog's tail gave the faintest wag, his massive head tilting with sudden attention. But the reaction came paired with a tremor that had nothing to do with weakness. This animal had learned to associate his former profession with pain. Eleanor's expression hardened with the particular fury reserved for those who hurt the innocent. "Michael, look at his paws." The pads were cracked and bleeding, suggesting weeks of walking on hot pavement. But more telling were the parallel scars across his shoulders and the deliberate pattern of injuries that spoke to systematic torture rather than simple neglect. Someone had wanted this dog to suffer, and they'd possessed the knowledge to make that suffering exquisite. "We need to call animal control," Eleanor said, though her voice lacked conviction. "No." Michael's response surprised them both with its vehemence. "Look at him, Eleanor. He's not just scared, he's traumatized. Whoever did this might have connections we call official channels, and he disappears into a system that might deliver him right back to the bastards who broke him." The dog seemed to understand their debate. He struggled to his feet, swaying with effort, and took 3 careful steps toward Michael. The movement cost him, his legs trembled with exhaustion, but he pressed his massive head against Michael's thigh with unmistakable trust. That simple gesture shattered something in Michael's chest. He'd spent 3 years avoiding emotional attachments, knowing that caring led to loss, and loss led to the kind of nightmares that made sleep impossible. But this broken warrior asking for help awakened every protective instinct he'd buried since Ranger died in that Kandahar explosion. "One night," Michael heard himself saying, "we'll get him stable, figure out our options." Eleanor's smile could have powered the whole neighborhood. "I'll get my first aid kit. And some chicken. Real chicken, not that processed nonsense. This boy needs protein." While Eleanor bustled home, Michael set up a makeshift bed in his shop's office using clean shop rags and a tarp. The dog watched every movement with careful attention, occasionally offering soft whimpers that sounded almost conversational. When Michael spoke, explaining his actions, describing the tool he was reaching for, maintaining the steady stream of commentary that had once calmed Ranger, the animal's breathing visibly eased. "You understand every word, don't you?" Michael asked, settling onto the floor beside his makeshift patient. "Question is, what the hell happened to you?" The answer began revealing itself when Eleanor returned with supplies. Her nursing background showed in the efficient way she cleaned wounds and assessed injuries, but it was her emotional response that provided the first real clue. "Michael," she said quietly, examining a partially healed brand mark on the dog's flank. "This isn't random cruelty. This is professional interrogation." The brand was small, precise, the kind of mark made by someone who understood anatomy and pain tolerance. But more disturbing was the dog's reaction when Eleanor's fingers approached certain areas. He didn't simply flinch. He positioned himself defensively, as if expecting specific types of assault. Someone was trying to break his training, Michael realized. They wanted information, or they wanted to turn him. Eleanor's hands stilled. Turn him how? Make him attack on command. Train him to hurt instead of protect. Michael's voice carried the weight of ugly knowledge. "I've seen it in war zones. Take a good dog, break his spirit, rebuild him as a weapon." The implications settled over them like Phoenix summer heat, oppressive and inescapable. This wasn't simply animal abuse. It was the systematic destruction of everything noble in a creature bred to serve and protect. The dog had been tortured not just physically, but psychologically, his very nature weaponized against itself. As if sensing their understanding, the German Shepherd struggled to sit upright. With tremendous effort, he lifted one paw and placed it on Michael's forearm, not in supplication, but in partnership. The gesture carried unmistakable meaning. He was choosing them, just as they were choosing him. "Well," Eleanor said, tears threatening her voice, "I guess that settles that." The decision to keep him came with immediate consequences. As Eleanor applied antibiotic ointment to the worst wounds, they heard the distinctive rumble of a large engine outside. Through the shop's grimy windows, they watched a black sedan cruise slowly past, windows tinted dark enough to hide the occupants. The dog's reaction was immediate and terrifying. He dropped flat against the floor, trembling violently, eyes fixed on the windows with pure terror. This wasn't the cautious fear of an abused animal. This was the specific, learned response of a victim recognizing his tormentors. The sedan made 2 more passes before disappearing down the street. Each time, the dog's breathing became more labored, his eyes darting between Michael and Eleanor as if memorizing their faces for a final goodbye. "They're looking for him," Eleanor whispered. Michael nodded grimly. "Which means we're all in danger now." But even as the weight of that reality settled over them, neither considered backing down. The dog had chosen them as his last hope, and they'd chosen him as their chance to do something decent in a world that seemed increasingly short on decency. Outside, the Phoenix sun climbed higher, promising another scorching day. Inside the auto shop, 3 damaged souls began the delicate work of healing, not just the dog's broken body, but their own broken hearts. They had no idea that their act of compassion had just made them targets in a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of law enforcement, or that the intelligence gleaming in the German Shepherd's eyes represented evidence that powerful people would kill to suppress. All they knew was that sometimes saving someone else was the only way to save yourself. Dr. Sarah Chen had seen her share of abuse cases in 15 years of veterinary practice, but the German Shepherd that Michael Thompson carried into her clinic made her question whether some cruelties were beyond forgiveness. The dog's weight, 32 pounds when he should have been 75, told only part of the story. The real horror lay in the precision of his injuries, the calculated nature of his suffering. "Jesus," she whispered, her professional composure cracking as she examined the electrical burn marks hidden beneath matted fur. "How long has he been like this?" "We don't know," Eleanor said from her position beside the examination table, one weathered hand gently stroking the dog's head. "Found him 3 days ago, but the condition suggests months of systematic abuse." Michael stood against the wall, arms crossed, studying every shadow beyond the clinic windows. The black sedan had appeared twice more since their first encounter, always maintaining distance, but never quite disappearing. Someone was watching, waiting, calculating. Dr. Chen's examination revealed the full scope of the nightmare. Beyond the obvious malnutrition and dehydration, the German Shepherd bore evidence of electrical shock therapy, deliberately broken ribs that had healed incorrectly, and psychological conditioning designed to destroy his natural protective instincts. Most disturbing were the needle marks along his spine, injection sites suggesting someone had been experimenting with neurological modification. "This isn't just abuse," Dr. Chen said quietly. "This is torture with a purpose. Someone was trying to break his mind." The dog, they'd started calling him Rex after Eleanor noticed his regal bearing despite his condition, seemed to understand every word. His intelligent eyes tracked the conversation, occasionally offering soft whimpers that sounded almost like commentary. When Dr. Chen mentioned the injection sites, Rex's entire body tensed, and he looked directly at Michael with unmistakable urgency. "He's trying to tell us something," Eleanor observed. "Look at his eyes. That's not just pain, that's information." The breakthrough came when Dr. Chen discovered the microchip. Standard procedure for any stray, the scanner should have revealed Rex's owner information. Instead, it displayed an error message she'd never seen. Classified, contact Phoenix PD K9 unit. The silence in the examination room stretched until Michael spoke, his voice carrying the weight of ugly realization. "He's not just any police dog, he's evidence." Eleanor's nursing background had taught her to read between the lines of bureaucratic language. "They're not looking for him to reunite him with his handler. They're looking for him to eliminate him." Rex's reaction to the word eliminate confirmed their fears. He struggled to his feet despite his weakness, positioned himself between Eleanor and the door, and released a low growl that carried more authority than his broken body should have been able to muster. Even in his current state, his protective instincts remained intact. Dr. Chen made a decision that would change all their lives. "Officially, I never saw this dog. Unofficially, we need to get him strong enough to survive whatever's coming." The treatment plan was aggressive and expensive. IV fluids to address dehydration, antibiotics for the infected wounds, pain medication, and a carefully monitored feeding schedule to rebuild his strength without shocking his system. The estimated cost, $3,200 for immediate stabilization alone, represented more money than Michael had seen in 6 months. "I can't afford this," he admitted, the words tasting like failure. "Hell, I can barely afford to keep myself fed." Eleanor's response surprised them both. "I have some savings. Teacher's pension doesn't go far, but it'll cover this." "Eleanor, no, that's your security." "Honey," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent 40 years caring for others, "security isn't money in the bank. Security is knowing you did the right thing when it mattered." While Rex received his first IV treatment, Eleanor shared what she'd been reluctant to discuss. Her son, Officer James Patterson, had been killed in the line of duty 3 years earlier. The official report called it an accident, a training exercise gone wrong, but Jimmy had been investigating corruption within the K9 unit when he died. He'd been asking questions about missing evidence, about dogs that disappeared from the program, Eleanor explained, her voice steady despite the tears. "I never believed the official story, but I didn't have proof." Michael felt the pieces clicking together with sickening clarity. Rex isn't just evidence of abuse, he's evidence of murder. The implications multiplied like cancer cells. If Rex had witnessed Jimmy Patterson's death, if he'd been tortured to break his testimony or trained to forget what he'd seen, then everyone who helped him became a threat to whoever had killed a police officer and covered it up. Dr. Chen finished adjusting Rex's IV and stepped away from the table. I'm going to say something once, and then we're not going to discuss it again. That dog has information in his head that people have killed for. Keeping him alive makes you targets. Walking away makes you complicit in murder. Eleanor reached across the table and took Michael's calloused hand in her soft one. I've been complicit for 3 years, honey. I'm tired of being afraid. Michael looked down at Rex, who was watching him with eyes that held too much intelligence for comfort. The dog knew the stakes. He understood that accepting their help meant dragging them into danger, but he also knew that he couldn't survive alone, and that the information locked in his traumatized mind might be the only way to get justice for Jimmy Patterson and the other victims. One condition, Michael said finally. We do this smart. Military planning, not civilian good intentions. Over the next hour, they developed a strategy. Dr. Chen would treat Rex under an assumed name, keeping him at the clinic overnight for observation. Michael would research the K-9 unit's recent history, looking for patterns in missing dogs and dead officers. Eleanor would contact Jimmy's former colleagues, the ones who'd asked uncomfortable questions after his death. As they prepared to leave Rex for the night, the German Shepherd did something that broke all their hearts. He struggled to stand, walked carefully to each of them, and pressed his massive head against their hands in turn, not asking for comfort, but offering gratitude. The gesture carried the weight of a warrior's salute, a recognition that they had chosen to stand with him when everyone else had either abandoned him or tried to destroy him. "We'll be back tomorrow," Eleanor promised, scratching behind his ears with the gentle touch of someone who understood that trust, once broken, was a precious gift when offered again. Rex settled onto the examination table with a sigh that seemed to release months of accumulated terror. For the first time since his ordeal began, he was clean, medicated, and surrounded by people who saw him as more than a tool to be used or a problem to be eliminated. But as they walked to Michael's truck, Eleanor noticed the black sedan parked across from the veterinary clinic. The occupant was invisible behind tinted windows, but the message was clear. They were all being watched now. "Michael," she said quietly, "what have we gotten ourselves into?" He helped her into the passenger seat, his eyes never leaving the sedan's silhouette. "Something bigger than we thought. And something that should have been handled a long time ago." As they drove away, neither saw the figure emerge from the sedan's driver's side. A tall man in his late 30s with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to authority. Derek Walsh had been Jimmy Patterson's partner, one of the last people to see him alive, and the man responsible for ensuring that certain secrets stayed buried. Rex's survival complicated everything, but Derek had built his career on solving complications permanently. Tomorrow he would pay the veterinary clinic a visit, and the problem of one inconvenient German Shepherd would finally be resolved. But tonight, for the first time in 8 months, Rex slept without nightmares, surrounded by the sense of antiseptic and kindness instead of fear and pain. The knock on Dr. Chen's clinic door came at 6:47 a.m., 13 minutes before official opening hours. Through the reinforced glass, she could see a tall man in a Phoenix PD uniform, his badge catching the early morning light. Everything about his appearance suggested routine. The polite smile, the official clipboard, the patient way he waited for her to unlock the door, everything except his eyes, which held the flat, predatory stillness of a shark circling wounded prey. "Dr. Chen, Officer Derek Walsh, Phoenix PD. I understand you treated a German Shepherd yesterday, one that matches the description of a stolen police K-9. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs, but 15 years of emergency veterinary work had taught her to function under pressure. I'd need to see proper paperwork before discussing any patient information. HIPAA applies to animals too, officer. Derek's smile never wavered, but something shifted behind his eyes. Of course. Professional protocols. I respect that. He produced a document from his clipboard. Official letterhead, case numbers, all the bureaucratic window dressing that made lies look legitimate. Rex was stolen from our training facility 8 months ago. We've been searching ever since. The name hit like ice water. She'd never told anyone outside their group what they'd started calling the German Shepherd. Either this was an impossible coincidence, or Derek Walsh knew far more about yesterday's events than he should. "I'm sorry, officer, but I don't have any record of treating a dog by that name. Perhaps you'd remember him by his condition: severely malnourished, evidence of electrical burns, injection sites along the spine." Derek's voice remained conversational, but each detail felt like a scalpel cutting through her defenses. Expensive treatment, the kind that requires overnight observation. Sarah's mind raced through possibilities, none of them good. This man knew too much, too specifically. Either he was legitimately searching for a stolen police dog, or he was the reason Rex had been tortured in the first place. "I'm going to need you to wait while I verify your credentials," she said, stepping back toward the phone. Derek nodded agreeably. "Take your time. But Dr. Chen, just so we understand each other, harboring stolen police property is a felony. So is interfering with an ongoing investigation. I'd hate to see a respected member of the community face those kinds of charges over a misunderstanding." 20 miles away, Michael was discovering that Eleanor Patterson's morning routine included skills she'd never mentioned. At 7:15 a.m., while most of Phoenix was fighting traffic, she sat at her kitchen table with Jimmy's old police scanner, a laptop that looked suspiciously advanced for a retired nurse, and a yellow legal pad covered in handwriting that would have made a detective proud. "Eleanor, where the hell did you learn surveillance techniques?" She looked up from her notes with the innocent expression of someone caught feeding stray cats instead of conducting amateur intelligence operations. "Honey, you think I spent 40 years in hospitals without learning how to dig up information people don't want found?" The legal pad told a story that made Michael's blood run cold. Rex wasn't just another canine. He'd been part of an elite unit specializing in locating missing persons. His handler, Officer Marcus Rodriguez, had died in a car accident 6 months after Jimmy Patterson's death. 2 other canine officers had taken early retirement under mysterious circumstances. The pattern suggested a systematic elimination of anyone who might have witnessed or investigated certain activities. "Look at this," Eleanor said, pointing to a newspaper clipping from 18 months ago. "Rodriguez was investigating a child trafficking ring when he died. Single vehicle accident on a straight road in perfect weather." Michael studied the article, his military experience providing context that civilian minds might miss. "That's not an accident. That's an execution made to look like an accident." The phone rang, interrupting their analysis. Eleanor answered with her customary warmth, but her expression darkened as she listened. "That was Sarah," she said after hanging up. "Phoenix PD showed up asking about Rex. She didn't give him anything, but they know he's there." The implications crashed over them like a wave. If Derek Walsh, and Michael was certain that's who had visited the clinic, knew about Rex's location, then their entire group was compromised. The black sedan, the surveillance, the official interest, they weren't just helping an abused animal anymore. They were harboring evidence that could expose corruption reaching deep into Phoenix law enforcement. "We need to move him," Michael said. "Today." Eleanor's response surprised him. "No, we need to move ourselves." She'd already thought it through with the strategic mind of someone who'd spent decades navigating hospital politics and bureaucratic warfare. Moving Rex would only delay the inevitable confrontation while making them look guilty. Instead, they needed to change the terms of engagement. "Jimmy left files," she explained, disappearing into her bedroom and returning with a banker's box that looked innocuous until she opened it. Inside were police reports, surveillance photos, financial records, and handwritten notes documenting a pattern of corruption that stretched back 5 years. He knew he was in danger. He prepared for this. The files painted a picture of systematic abuse that went far beyond Rex's individual suffering. The K-9 unit had been infiltrated by officers working for a trafficking organization, using police resources to transport victims and eliminate witnesses. Dogs like Rex weren't just trained to find missing persons. They were trained to find specific missing persons, then retrained to forget what they'd found when their testimony became inconvenient. Jesus Christ, Michael breathed, studying a photograph of Rex with a young girl who'd been reported missing 14 months ago. He's not just evidence of abuse, he's evidence of kidnapping, trafficking, murder. And he remembers it all, Eleanor finished. That's why they tried to break his mind instead of just killing him. They needed to know what he'd seen, what he might lead other investigators to. The weight of responsibility settled over them like a burial shroud. This wasn't about saving one dog anymore. It was about saving an unknown number of children whose disappearances had been covered up by the very people sworn to protect them. Michael made the call to Dr. Chen at 8:30 a.m., using phrases that sounded casual but carried military significance. "How's our friend feeling this morning? Strong enough for a family reunion?" Sarah understood immediately. "He's been asking for you. Might be ready for discharge sooner than expected." "We'll be right there." But as they prepared to leave Eleanor's house, Rex was making his own decision about the future. Somewhere in his traumatized mind, the German Shepherd had retained not just his training, but his sense of duty. When Derek Walsh returned to the clinic with a warrant and backup officers, Rex did something that surprised everyone. He didn't hide. He didn't submit. Instead, he positioned himself at the clinic's front door and began to bark. Not the panicked yelping of a frightened animal, but the controlled, purposeful, alert bark of a K-9 officer, signaling danger. Dr. Chen understood the message and activated the clinic's emergency lockdown system, designed to contain dangerous animals but equally effective at keeping dangerous humans outside. As steel shutters descended over the windows and doors, Rex continued his alert, his voice carrying across the parking lot with unmistakable authority. The sound reached Michael and Eleanor as they approached in his battered pickup truck. One look at the police vehicles surrounding the clinic told them everything they needed to know. "They're moving faster than we expected," Eleanor observed with remarkable calm. Michael parked behind a neighboring building and studied the situation through his rearview mirror. 3 patrol cars, an unmarked sedan, and what looked like a SWAT van. That's not a routine recovery operation. That's a raid. Inside the clinic, Derek Walsh was discovering that cornering a traumatized K-9 officer was more complicated than cornering an ordinary dog. Rex had taken position at the intersection of 2 hallways, giving him clear sight lines to all approaches while keeping his back to a solid wall. Every aspect of his positioning demonstrated tactical thinking that should have been impossible for an animal suffering from psychological conditioning. "Rex!" Derek called, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to obedience. "Here, boy. Come to Daddy." The German Shepherd's response was a low growl that seemed to emerge from some primal place where justice and vengeance intersected. This wasn't the broken animal Derek had helped torture 8 months ago. This was a warrior who'd found his strength again, surrounded by people who valued his service instead of exploiting it. Dr. Chen watched from her office, speaking quietly into her phone. "Yes, I need to report a police harassment situation. Officers are attempting to confiscate a patient without proper medical clearance." The call was a delaying tactic, but it bought precious minutes for Michael and Eleanor to implement the plan they developed during their drive to the clinic. Eleanor's experience with hospital bureaucracy proved invaluable. She knew exactly which phrases would trigger mandatory waiting periods and administrative reviews. "This is Eleanor Patterson," she announced when the clinic's phone rang. "I'm calling as the legal guardian of Rex Patterson. Yes, he's family property now, properly documented through emergency adoption procedures. Any attempt to remove him requires family consent and judicial review." The legal fiction was tissue-thin, but it was enough to complicate Derek's simple seizure operation. While he argued with supervisors over radio, explaining why a routine K-9 recovery had become a legal quagmire, Rex demonstrated that his memory was far more intact than anyone had realized. Moving with purpose that belied his still fragile condition, the German Shepherd approached Dr. Chen's desk and began pawing at specific drawers. When she opened the one he indicated, Rex carefully extracted a manila envelope with his teeth and carried it to the front door. Inside the envelope were the X-rays and photographs documenting his injuries, evidence that would be impossible to explain away as accident or illness. Rex had not only retained his intelligence, he'd retained his understanding of evidence preservation. "Smart boy," Dr. Chen whispered. "You know exactly what they're afraid of." Outside, Derek Walsh was facing a situation that had spiraled beyond his control. What should have been a quiet evidence elimination had become a public incident involving legal challenges, media attention, a news van had arrived, and administrative complications that made summary action impossible. Michael and Eleanor used the confusion to slip into the clinic through the emergency exit, an access route that Dr. Chen had left conspicuously unlocked. They found Rex alert and ready, his medical improvements visible but his eyes still carrying the weight of terrible knowledge. "Time to go, boy," Michael said simply. Rex stood immediately, his tail giving the faintest wag of acknowledgement, but instead of moving toward the exit, he turned back to Dr. Chen and performed an action that left all three humans speechless. The German Shepherd stood at attention, raised his right paw to his forehead in a perfect military salute, and held the position for 10 seconds before lowering his paw and moving to Michael's side. "He's thanking you," Eleanor whispered, tears threatening her voice. "He knows you saved his life." Dr. Chen knelt and scratched behind Rex's ears one final time. "Stay safe, warrior. The world needs heroes like you." As they prepared to slip away through the emergency exit, Rex paused and looked back at the front of the clinic where Derek Walsh was still arguing with his supervisors. The look in the German Shepherd's eyes held no fear, only the patient, implacable determination of a soldier who'd found his mission again. The war for Rex's life was far from over, but the first battle belonged to the good guys. The abandoned mining facility outside Phoenix had been forgotten by everyone except those who needed places where screams wouldn't carry. 40 miles from the city, nestled between red rock formations that provided natural sound barriers, the old copper mine offered perfect isolation for activities that thrived in darkness. Victor Steinberg had been using locations like this for 45 years, ever since he'd learned that society's unwanted children could be remarkably profitable if you knew the right buyers. Rex led them through the maze of industrial decay with the precision of a GPS system, his nose twitching as he followed scent trails invisible to human senses. Despite his recent trauma and ongoing recovery, the German Shepherd moved with renewed purpose, his K-9 training overriding physical limitations. Every few hundred yards he would stop, test the air, and adjust their course with the confidence of someone retracing familiar territory. "He's been here before," Michael observed, watching Rex navigate around rusted equipment and unstable flooring with practiced ease. "Recently." Eleanor struggled to keep pace, her 68-year-old legs protesting the rough terrain, but her determination never wavered. She'd brought Jimmy's service weapon, a .38 Special she'd legally inherited but never intended to use until now. The weight of it in her purse served as a reminder that some situations couldn't be resolved with kindness and conversation. They'd been tracking Derek Walsh for 3 days, ever since the clinic incident had forced him underground. Eleanor's network of former hospital colleagues had proven invaluable. Retired nurses had contacts throughout Phoenix's medical community, and missing children always left medical traces. Emergency room visits for accidents, prescription patterns for sedatives, veterinary supplies purchased in unusual quantities. The breadcrumbs led consistently to the same conclusion. Someone was running a sophisticated trafficking operation with medical support. The breakthrough had come when Rex demonstrated an ability that nobody expected. While examining Jimmy's old case files, the German Shepherd had begun responding to photographs, not just any photographs, but specific images of missing children. His reactions weren't random. They followed a pattern that suggested he'd been present when these children were processed through whatever system had ultimately claimed them. He's a living witness, Eleanor had realized. He saw where they took the children, and his memory is intact enough to lead us back. Now, as they approached the mining facility's main compound, Rex's behavior confirmed their worst fears. The German Shepherd dropped into tactical mode, his body language shifting from guide dog to assault specialist. He'd been here during operational periods, had witnessed activities that required military-level security protocols. Michael studied the facility through binoculars scavenged from his Army days. 3 buildings showed signs of recent use: fresh tire tracks, maintained lighting, security cameras that gleamed too brightly to be abandoned equipment. More troubling were the vehicles: a medical transport van, 2 police cruisers, and the black sedan that had been stalking them for days. "They're not just using this place for storage," he whispered. "This is an active operation." Eleanor's nursing background provided the missing piece of the puzzle. Medical transport van means they're keeping people here for extended periods. That's not trafficking, that's farming. The implications hit like physical blows. This wasn't a simple kidnapping operation that moved children quickly through criminal networks. This was a systematic facility designed to hold victims long-term, probably conditioning them for specific purposes or buyers. The medical equipment suggested ongoing maintenance of human inventory. Rex's low growl warned them of approaching danger moments before they heard voices. 3 men emerged from the main building: Derek Walsh, another officer Michael didn't recognize, and an elderly man whose expensive clothing contrasted sharply with the industrial surroundings. "Steinberg," Eleanor breathed, recognizing the figure from Jimmy's surveillance photos. "He's actually here." Victor Steinberg moved with the casual authority of someone surveying his domain. At 72, he remained physically imposing, his voice carrying easily across the compound as he issued instructions to his subordinates. The conversation that drifted toward their hiding position made Michael's blood freeze. "The dog's become a liability we can't afford," Steinberg was saying. Along with his new friends, clean slate Derek, no witnesses, no evidence, no loose ends. Derek nodded with the eager compliance of someone desperately trying to preserve his position in a crumbling conspiracy. "What about the clinic vet? She's seen too much." "Include her in the cleanup. Make it look like a break-in gone wrong. 3 dead, dog put down for attacking the intruders. Problem solved." Eleanor's intake of breath was barely audible, but Rex heard it. The German Shepherd turned and pressed against her leg, offering comfort while maintaining his surveillance of the compound. His presence reminded them that they weren't just hiding. They were gathering intelligence for what came next. Michael activated the recording app on his phone, capturing Steinberg's casual discussion of multiple murders. The evidence was circumstantial, but combined with Jimmy's files and Rex's testimony, assuming they survived to present it, it might be enough to expose the entire network. The real horror emerged as they continued listening. Steinberg wasn't just discussing their elimination. He was coordinating the relocation of inventory to secondary facilities. Children's voices, distant but unmistakably young, confirmed that the mining facility was currently operational. They weren't just witnessing a criminal conspiracy, they were listening to the sounds of ongoing trafficking. "How many?" Eleanor whispered, her nurse's instincts demanding triage assessment. Michael counted carefully. At least 6 distinct voices, possibly more from the buildings they couldn't see directly. The ages seemed to range from very young, maybe 8 or 9, to mid-teens. All of them sounded drugged or conditioned, their conversations lacking the energy and randomness of normal children. Rex's response to the children's voices was immediate and heartbreaking, his entire body tensed with recognition and protective fury. Low whimpers escaped his throat, not sounds of fear, but expressions of frustration at being unable to help. This dog had been forced to participate in these children's suffering, his natural protective instincts weaponized against his own nature. "We have to call this in," Michael said, reaching for his phone. Eleanor stopped him with a gentle but firm grip on his wrist. "Call who?" "Derek's wearing a Phoenix PD uniform, and we don't know how deep this corruption goes. We report this through normal channels, and those children disappear before backup arrives." The tactical situation was impossible. 3 civilians and an injured dog against at least 3 armed men, with hostages that prevented any aggressive action. Even if they could overcome the immediate threats, they had no way to secure the children or prevent Steinberg from activating whatever contingency plans a 45-year criminal career had taught him to maintain. But Rex had other ideas. The German Shepherd suddenly stood and began moving toward the compound with deliberate purpose. When Michael tried to call him back, Rex turned and fixed him with a look that conveyed unmistakable intelligence. The dog wasn't abandoning them or acting on impulse, he was implementing a plan. "He knows something we don't," Eleanor realized. "Let him go." Rex approached the compound's perimeter with the careful precision of a trained operative conducting reconnaissance. His route avoided the obvious sight lines while keeping him close enough to monitor conversations. When he reached a position near the main building, he began a behavior that initially confused them. The German Shepherd started barking, not the aggressive alert bark they'd heard at the clinic, but a specific pattern of vocalizations that sounded almost like code. Long barks followed by short ones, pauses at regular intervals, repetition of distinct sequences. "Jesus Christ," Michael breathed. "He's calling for backup." The realization struck with crystalline clarity. Rex wasn't just barking randomly. He was using K9 communication protocols, signaling other dogs that might be held within the facility. If Steinberg's operation included multiple animals, Rex was attempting to coordinate a simultaneous response. The answer came from inside the buildings as other dogs began responding. At least 4 distinct voices joined Rex's calls, their barks carrying the disciplined cadence of trained animals rather than the chaotic noise of ordinary dogs. Steinberg had been holding other K9 officers, probably using them for the same evidence-tracking purposes that had made Rex so valuable. Derek Walsh emerged from the main building with a rifle, his face twisted with the particular fury of someone whose carefully maintained facade was collapsing. "Shut that fucking mud up before—" His words were cut off by the sound of approaching helicopters. The distinctive whop, whop, whop of rotors echoed off the canyon walls, growing louder by the second. Rex's barking had done more than coordinate other dogs. It had activated some kind of emergency beacon that Michael hadn't known existed. "FBI," Eleanor said with satisfaction. "Jimmy set up dead man switches. If Rex ever returned to this location and activated his distress signal, it would trigger federal intervention." The compound erupted into chaos as Steinberg's organization scrambled to implement damage control protocols. But the helicopters were already overhead, and tactical teams were rappelling toward the buildings with the efficiency of a well-planned operation. Rex had led them to this moment, using his own traumatic memories as a roadmap to justice. As federal agents secured the perimeter and began evacuating children, the German Shepherd returned to Michael and Eleanor with his tail wagging for the first time since they'd met him. The war for Rex's life had become a war for justice itself, and finally, the good guys were winning. The cardiac monitor's steady beeping was the only sound in Arizona State Veterinary Hospital's intensive care unit, where Rex lay motionless on a steel table surrounded by machines that measured the distance between life and death. 3 hours earlier, he'd been a hero leading federal agents to missing children. Now he was a patient whose body had finally surrendered to months of systematic torture and the adrenaline crash that followed his moment of triumph. Dr. Chen's face betrayed none of the desperation she felt as she studied the latest blood work results. "His organs are shutting down," she told Michael and Eleanor, her voice carrying the careful neutrality of someone delivering a terminal diagnosis. "The malnutrition, the stress, the electrical damage to his nervous system, his body simply can't sustain this level of trauma anymore." Michael stood at Rex's side, one calloused hand resting gently on the German Shepherd's flank, feeling the irregular rhythm of breathing that seemed to grow weaker with each cycle. The dog's eyes were open but unfocused, consciousness flickering like a candle in strong wind. Occasionally, Rex would lift his massive head slightly, as if looking for something or someone before exhaustion forced him back into stillness. "What are his chances?" Eleanor asked, though her nursing background had already provided the answer she didn't want to hear. "Without surgery, maybe 6 hours. With surgery." Dr. Chen hesitated, weighing hope against professional honesty. "The procedure would cost $15,000, and even if everything goes perfectly, he'd have maybe a 30% chance of survival. His heart is badly damaged from the electrical torture. We'd essentially be rebuilding his cardiovascular system." The financial reality hit like a physical blow. Michael's entire net worth, including his truck and business equipment, wouldn't cover half the surgical costs. Eleanor's savings had been depleted by Rex's initial treatment. They'd spent everything they had to save him, and it wasn't enough. "How long do we have to decide?" Michael asked. 2 hours, maybe 3. After that, the damage becomes irreversible." Outside the ICU, the world was celebrating Rex's heroism. News vans filled the hospital parking lot, reporters eager for interviews with the German Shepherd, who'd exposed a trafficking ring and saved 11 children. Federal agents wanted to discuss Rex's role as a witness in what was already being called the largest police corruption case in Arizona history. Everyone wanted a piece of the hero dog story. But heroes, Michael reflected bitterly, still died when their bodies failed, regardless of how many lives they'd saved. Eleanor sat beside Rex's table, her weathered hands folded in prayer, speaking in the soft murmur she'd once used to comfort dying patients during her nursing career. "You've done enough, sweetheart," she whispered. "If you need to rest now, that's okay. You've earned your peace." The German Shepherd's eyes found her face, and for a moment his tail gave the faintest twitch of acknowledgement. Even dying, he was trying to comfort them. Michael's phone buzzed with the latest updates from the FBI raid. Victor Steinberg had been captured attempting to flee across the Mexican border. Derek Walsh was in federal custody, along with 8 other Phoenix PD officers. The 11 children rescued from the mining facility were receiving medical treatment and would eventually be reunited with families who'd given up hope years ago. All of it possible because a broken dog had found the courage to trust again, to lead them into danger when staying hidden would have been safer. Rex had traded his life for those children's freedom, and the mathematics of that exchange felt simultaneously noble and unbearably tragic. "There has to be something," Michael said, desperation creeping into his voice. "Some program, some charity, some fucking way to save him." Dr. Chen's expression softened with the particular sadness of veterinarians who'd learned that love and money rarely aligned when they mattered most. "I've contacted every animal welfare organization in the state. Police dog foundations, military working dog groups, emergency veterinary funds. Everyone wants to help after the story breaks, but $15,000 immediately. That's beyond what most nonprofits can authorize quickly. Eleanor stood and walked to the window overlooking the parking lot, where reporters continued their vigil. Her shoulders carried the weight of accumulated loss. Her husband, her son, and now the dog who'd become a symbol of hope reborn. At 68, she'd buried too many beings she'd loved to maintain illusions about fairness or justice. "Michael," she said quietly, "I need to tell you something about the surgery." He looked up from Rex's still form, reading something in her tone that made his chest tighten with new dread. Even if we had the money, even if the surgery was successful, Rex would never be the same. Dr. Chen explained the long-term prognosis while you were talking to the FBI agents. Eleanor turned back to face them, tears threatening her voice. Heart damage this severe means a shortened lifespan, constant medication, limited physical activity. He'd survive, but he'd never really live again. The implications settled over them like lead blankets. They weren't just fighting to save Rex's life, they were fighting to condemn him to years of medical dependency and physical limitation. The dog who'd lived for action and purpose would become a permanent patient, existing but not truly alive. "What are you saying?" Michael asked, though he already knew. "I'm saying maybe the kindest thing we can do is let him go while he's still a hero, before the pain gets worse, before his body becomes a prison." Eleanor's voice broke on the last words. "Sometimes love means knowing when to stop fighting." The suggestion hung in the air like a prayer no one wanted to say. Rex had suffered enough. Months of torture, psychological conditioning, systematic abuse designed to break his spirit. Forcing him to endure more pain, even with the best intentions, might be another form of cruelty. Dr. Chen cleared her throat gently. "There is one other option. Experimental." Both Michael and Eleanor turned toward her with desperate attention. "We've been working with the University of Arizona on regenerative heart therapy for working dogs, stem cell treatment combined with surgical repair. It's never been tried on damage this extensive, and the success rate for cases like Rex's is essentially unknown." She paused, measuring her words carefully. "It would mean making Rex a test subject. The procedure itself could kill him, and if it fails, he'd suffer more than he would with simple euthanasia." "But if it works?" Michael pressed. "If it works, he'd have a real chance at a normal lifespan and quality of life. The university would cover all costs in exchange for research data." Eleanor returned to Rex's side, studying his face with the clinical assessment of someone who'd spent decades evaluating patients' capacity for recovery. The German shepherd's breathing had grown more labored, but his eyes still held the intelligence and determination that had made him an exceptional K-9 officer. "What would Rex choose?" she asked softly. "If he could understand the options, what would he want?" Michael considered the question seriously. In their brief time together, Rex had consistently chosen courage over safety, action over resignation. Even dying, he'd tried to comfort them, rather than surrender to despair. "He'd want to fight," Michael said with quiet certainty. "He'd want the chance to live, even if the odds were against him." Eleanor nodded slowly. "Then we give him that chance." Dr. Chen began preparing for the experimental procedure while Michael and Eleanor said what might be their final goodbyes to the dog who'd changed their lives. Rex seemed to understand the gravity of the moment. He lifted his massive head with tremendous effort and looked directly into each of their faces, his eyes conveying gratitude and affection that transcended the limitations of species. "Thank you," Michael whispered, scratching behind Rex's ears one last time. "For trusting us. And for showing us what courage looks like." Eleanor leaned down and kissed the top of Rex's head. We'll be here when you wake up, sweetheart. And if you don't wake up, know that you saved those children. You made everything matter." As they wheeled Rex toward the surgical suite, his tail gave one final weak wag. Not goodbye, but acknowledgement. He was ready for whatever came next. The next 6 hours would determine whether miracles were real or just stories people told themselves when reality became unbearable. But in that moment, watching a broken dog face uncertain surgery with unwavering dignity, Michael and Eleanor knew they'd already witnessed something miraculous. Sometimes salvation came on 4 legs, and sometimes love meant having the courage to let go while holding on to hope. The call came at 4:17 a.m., 48 hours after Rex had been wheeled into experimental surgery. Dr. Chen's voice carried exhaustion and something else, a tremor that could have been triumph or devastating news. Michael answered on the first ring, Eleanor stirring beside him on the hospital waiting room couch where they'd maintained their vigil. "He's awake," Dr. Chen said simply. "The surgery was successful, but Michael, there's something else you need to know." They found Rex in the recovery suite, alert and responsive, his tail giving tentative wags when he saw them approach. The improvement was remarkable. His breathing was steady, his eyes clear, and for the first time since they'd met him, he looked genuinely peaceful. But Dr. Chen's expression carried complications that went beyond medical recovery. "During the surgery, we discovered something unusual," she began, pulling up digital images on her computer. The electrical damage to his nervous system wasn't random torture. It was deliberate neural modification. Someone was trying to alter his memory patterns. The X-rays showed tiny metallic fragments embedded near Rex's brain stem, so small they'd been missed in initial examinations. Each fragment was positioned with surgical precision, creating a network that could theoretically interfere with memory formation and recall. They weren't just torturing him, Michael realized with growing horror. They were trying to erase what he'd witnessed. Eleanor's nursing background provided the missing piece. That's why they kept him alive so long. They needed him functional enough to lead them to evidence he might have hidden, but damaged enough that he couldn't testify about what he'd seen. The implications multiplied like cancer cells. Rex hadn't just been a victim of police corruption. He'd been the subject of experimental mind control techniques. The trafficking ring hadn't simply been kidnapping children, they'd been developing methods to create untraceable witnesses and controllable victims. "Can you remove the implants?" Michael asked. "That's the remarkable thing," Dr. Chen said, her voice carrying genuine amazement. "We didn't need to. Rex's brain developed workarounds. His neural pathways literally rerouted around the interference. From a neurological standpoint, he shouldn't have been able to retain memories or demonstrate the intelligence we've observed, but somehow he adapted." Rex chose that moment to demonstrate exactly how intact his cognitive abilities remained. He stood carefully, walked to Dr. Chen's desk, and began pawing at specific drawers until she opened the one containing case files from other animals brought in by law enforcement. Using his teeth, Rex extracted a particular folder and carried it to Michael. Inside were photographs and medical records for 3 other German shepherds, all K9 officers, all reported missing over the past 2 years, all showing evidence of similar neural modifications. Rex had recognized their files and was identifying other victims of the same experimental program. "Jesus Christ," Eleanor breathed. "How many dogs did they experiment on?" The answer came from an unexpected source. FBI agent Sarah Martinez entered the recovery suite with the purposeful stride of someone carrying urgent news. She'd been the lead investigator on the trafficking case, working around the clock to unravel the conspiracy that Rex had helped expose. "We arrested Dr. Marcus Webb 30 minutes ago," Agent Martinez announced. "Neurosurgeon at Phoenix General, officially retired but apparently freelancing for Steinberg's organization." Rex's medical files were in his personal computer, along with documentation for a dozen other animals. The scope of the conspiracy continued expanding. Dr. Webb hadn't just been modifying police dogs. He'd been perfecting techniques that could theoretically be applied to human subjects. The missing children rescued from the mining facility showed signs of similar neural interference, their memories fragmented in ways that made testimony difficult or impossible. Rex is the only subject who successfully resisted the conditioning, Agent Martinez continued. His recovery represents the only intact witness to the full scope of their operations. Eleanor pulled out a chair and sat heavily, the weight of revelation overwhelming her 68-year-old frame. They turned our police dogs into guinea pigs for human experimentation. How do we even process something like that? Michael's response came from the part of his mind that had been trained to function in impossible situations. One step at a time, we prosecute everyone involved, we save every victim we can identify, and we make sure this never happens again. But Rex had other priorities. The German Shepherd approached each of them in turn, pressing his massive head against their hands with gentle insistence. When he'd received acknowledgement from Michael and Eleanor, he walked to Agent Martinez and performed the same gesture. "He's thanking us," the FBI agent said with wonder. "A dog who's been tortured for months is thanking his rescuers." Dr. Chen checked Rex's surgical incisions one final time, her professional satisfaction evident in every movement. "From a medical standpoint, he's ready for discharge. The experimental therapy exceeded all expectations. His heart function is normal, the neural damage has been bypassed, and his physical recovery is remarkable." The question of where Rex would go next had been weighing on everyone's minds. Officially, he remained property of the Phoenix Police Department, though the corruption scandal had called that ownership into question. Legally, his status was complicated by his role as evidence in ongoing federal prosecutions. Agent Martinez provided the answer they'd all been hoping for. "The FBI is recommending that Rex be retired from active duty and placed with his current caretakers. Given his trauma history and the experimental modifications, he needs stability rather than continued service obligations." Eleanor's smile could have powered the entire hospital. "Are you saying what I think you're saying? I'm saying Rex has earned the right to choose his own family. And from what I've observed, he's already made that choice." Rex seemed to understand the conversation's direction. He positioned himself between Michael and Eleanor, sitting with the dignified bearing of a dog who'd found his place in the world. His tail wagged steadily, not the desperate gratitude of a rescued animal, but the confident contentment of a family member claiming his rightful position. "There's one more thing," Agent Martinez said, producing an official document from her briefcase. "Rex's service record has been updated to reflect his role in exposing the trafficking ring and saving 11 children. He's being awarded the FBI Director's Medal for Exceptional Service, the highest honor available to a non-human partner." The medal ceremony would take place in 2 weeks, with full media coverage and recognition from law enforcement agencies nationwide. Rex would officially be celebrated as a hero, his story serving as testimony to the resilience of those who serve and the power of second chances. But more important than public recognition was the private moment happening in the recovery suite. 3 survivors of different traumas, a war veteran struggling with PTSD, an elderly woman grieving multiple losses, and a police dog subjected to experimental torture, had found healing through their commitment to each other. "So, what happens now?" Michael asked, though he already knew the answer. Eleanor reached for both his hand and Rex's head, connecting the 3 of them in a circle of mutual support. "Now we go home. We learn to be a family. We heal together." Rex's response was to rest his chin on Eleanor's knee while keeping one paw touching Michael's boot. a physical manifestation of the bond that had sustained them through the darkest moments of their shared ordeal. Dr. An Chen watched the interaction with the professional satisfaction of someone who'd witnessed not just physical healing, but emotional restoration. "Some cases remind you why you became a veterinarian," she said softly. "This is one of those cases." As they prepared to leave the hospital, Rex walked steadily between his chosen humans, his head held high despite the surgical scars and the traumatic memories that would always be part of his story. He'd survived torture, exposed corruption, saved children, and found a family, all while demonstrating that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite being afraid. The German Shepherd who'd arrived as a broken victim was leaving as a decorated hero, but more importantly, he was leaving as a beloved family member who'd proven that love could overcome any form of conditioning or abuse. Sometimes miracles came disguised as ordinary moments: an old woman scratching behind a dog's ears, a veteran learning to trust again, a traumatized animal choosing hope over fear. They were going home together. 6 months after Rex first collapsed behind Michael's auto shop, Christmas morning arrived in Phoenix with the kind of crystalline blue sky that made desert winters feel like gifts from heaven. Eleanor's living room overflowed with an unlikely family gathered around a tree that sparkled with ornaments collected from 3 very different lives: military service medals converted to decorations, nursing school pins transformed into angels, and a new addition that made everyone smile: Rex's FBI medal hanging in place of honor at the tree's peak. Michael adjusted the reindeer antlers that Rex wore with dignified patience, the German Shepherd's tolerance for holiday costumes representing just one of many small miracles that had accumulated over the months. At 73 pounds of healthy muscle and glossy coat, Rex bore little resemblance to the skeletal creature who'd once dragged himself across scorching asphalt. The only remaining evidence of his ordeal were the scars that decorated his chest like badges of honor, and the occasional nightmare that sent him seeking comfort in the middle of the night. "Hold still, you magnificent beast," Eleanor laughed from her position behind the camera, trying to capture the perfect family photo while Rex attempted to remove his festive headwear. "This is going on Christmas cards." The living room held more than just the 3 of them. Dr. Chen had joined their celebration, along with Agent Martinez and her 2 children, survivors of the trafficking ring who'd formed an unbreakable bond with the dog who'd led to their rescue. Jake Morrison and Luis Santos, Michael's Army buddies who'd provided tactical support during the mining facility raid, rounded out the gathering with their own families. What had started as 3 broken individuals had grown into a community built around the simple recognition that everyone deserved a second chance at happiness. Rex demonstrated his complete recovery by efficiently working his way around the room, collecting scratches behind the ears from each guest, while maintaining careful inventory of the turkey Eleanor had been basting all morning. His transformation from traumatized victim to beloved family member had become local legend, but the dog himself seemed most proud of simpler accomplishments, sleeping through the night without fear, playing fetch in Eleanor's backyard, and serving as unofficial therapy dog for other veterans at the VA hospital where Michael now volunteered. "You know what I'm grateful for this year?" Eleanor announced, settling into her favorite armchair with Rex positioning himself protectively beside her. "I'm grateful for the reminder that family isn't about blood or circumstances, it's about who shows up when everything falls apart." Michael raised his coffee mug in acknowledgement. "To showing up!" The toast was interrupted by Rex's sudden alertness, his ears swiveling toward the front door moments before the doorbell chimed. Dr. Chen's newest patient waited on the porch, another German Shepherd, this one a retired military working dog whose handler had died in combat, leaving behind an animal struggling with his own form of survivor's guilt. "Room for one more?" Dr. Chen asked as Rex approached the newcomer with the gentle authority of someone who understood exactly what trauma looked like and how healing began. Eleanor's answer came in the form of a second-place setting that appeared at the dinner table as if by magic, along with an extra bowl placed beside Rex's food station. There was always room for one more in a family built on the understanding that love multiplied when shared rather than diminished. As the afternoon dissolved into evening, Rex claimed his favorite spot on the couch between Michael and Eleanor, his massive frame somehow managing to provide physical contact with both humans while maintaining dignified posture. The contentment in his brown eyes reflected the peace that comes from knowing you're exactly where you belong. "What are you thinking about, boy?" Michael asked, scratching behind Rex's ears with the easy affection of someone whose entire relationship with trust had been rebuilt through caring for this remarkable animal. Rex's response was a deep, satisfied sigh and the gentle placement of his head on Eleanor's lap, a gesture that communicated more about love, loyalty, and second chances than any words could convey. Outside, the Phoenix sunset painted the desert in shades of gold and crimson, while inside, three souls who'd found each other in their darkest moments celebrated the simple miracle of being alive, being together, and being grateful for every ordinary day that felt extraordinary when shared with those who truly understood the value of showing up. And they all lived happily, gratefully, ever after. Sometimes the most profound transformations begin with the simplest acts of kindness. Rex's story reminds us that it's never too late to rebuild your life, that family isn't defined by blood, but by who shows up when everything falls apart, and that the courage to care can heal wounds we never thought would mend. At 68, Eleanor discovered that her greatest purpose wasn't behind her. It was waiting in an auto shop parking lot, broken and afraid, needing exactly the kind of love she had to give. Michael learned that the battles worth fighting aren't always the ones that make headlines, but the quiet daily choices to trust, to hope, to open your heart one more time despite the risk of loss. In a world that often makes us feel invisible after a certain age, Rex's story proves that our most important chapters might still be unwritten. The children saved, the corruption exposed, the family formed, all because three wounded souls refused to give up on each other. Your story isn't over. Your capacity to make a difference, to love deeply, to find unexpected joy isn't diminished by the number of candles on your birthday cake. Sometimes salvation really does come on four legs, reminding us that we're never too old for miracles. What moment in your life taught you that it's never too late for a fresh start? Have you ever found unexpected family in the most unlikely places? Share your story in the comments below. We'd love to hear how you've discovered that the best chapters of life can begin at any age.